sometimes when I try to describe things halfway a little bit understandable regarding the state corrections offices and the state judicial branch offices tied names, they wipe out what I typed. And the FBI has roles with this too. Increasingly with the Facebook pages of Weathersfield Police Department, of child abusers, camp leaders of kids, involved with leaders of prisons. Also, they're implying that and demonstrating they have roles of people at the prisons. No, that might be undercover. But anyway, they're putting fake transcripts. They have roles with corruption interbranch with the state corrections offices and judicial branch offices of Connecticut interstates. Also with people from California involved with the networks with Channel 3 News attachment to fake conversations with themselves and others. They have collusions with the interbranch uses of their own differences and other people's differences where they were recorded they needed to hide that, and collusions with names on all sides of criminal and civil cases interstates at the same time with the names of the courts and the names of their positions, putting self-value roles with the same sequence shifts, same natures of collusions with all natures of crime scenes, originally and still black people's pair. In other words, you guys are little child abusers with Sandy Hook, Newtown, Connecticut, involved with the state judicial branch offices and corrections offices, also between the campuses intercities, and between the campuses intra-cities, and between the campuses intercampuses and intra-campuses. Increasingly, people through administrations putting fake transcripts in databases. These prisons are involved with a whole bunch of torture methods too, where they have delusions too in the way of proper justice. They have timed collusion /S, increasingly with wire crimes. And police, they attached me to fake conversations with them at the police department when I was a kid and I was an adult. Increasingly, there are what do they call directors involved with people and the people that work for them involved with planting evidences with the FBI and courts, sequence shifts on Covington Street and New Britain, Connecticut, with people intercities through time on my street in Weathersfield, Connecticut, collusions with them. In other words, then they keep making it worse because they're trying to cover up intercities and intra-cities with the same ones. They have rules of untimely deaths and murders. Even if they made any or all of that up, and with the names next to body dumping spots. Increasingly, people that I didn't even have classes with ties to were putting with their teachers and themselves in databases behind my back in other cases, in other classes, little tricks like that. And then they're building on roles with that, filming fake things on a mass scale. It's the foreign and domestic at the same time, per worse. Also relative to where and to how northern colonies and southern colonies, their difference as roles, including, in other words, communicating other for what our founders communicated about how they had to force the rest of the founders because it was a breaching method entrenched too well. And roles with it were too well, they were effective to keep collusions against selves and others syntactically and physically to an extent. Otherwise, that body was sensed, trying to adapt syntactically or physically. And it was adapted to include that body was a majority of people, black pupils, including pupils, everyone. Any grouping of countries that's entertained the way we are. Look at the New York City black pupils. In other words, you think that one honest voice could, on paper, legitimately pretend that, get away with pretending that science, they believe that science spoke legitimately for that. The suburbs were designed for a torture, extortion, slavery method. Our founders' communications about that have been changed in our face, even though it was declassified. Inside the nature of debate, when you guys debate history, principles of it, you guys are collusion /S. What forgiveness is for is because campuses A through Z, one of the things it's for is they're sickly distinctly, but also non-distinctly, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, rotten. The breaching method makes use of the differences of them, but through yourselves, A through Z, as systems tactical theory from its own. The one that's showing us species bodies of individual bodies, all group differences, generating its own. We are not allowed to appreciate. In other words, in offensive, we have people making confessions and demonstrations. This is where and how the branches of government leak. So Connecticut's Channel 3 News faked conversations with me, with themselves, and with others as various natures of organized crimes. and as their roles with the World Trade Center attack, with all the different countries, including Saudi Arabia, in the news, involved increasingly with people with the state of Connecticut judicial branch offices and the corrections offices in conjunctions to them and to that, like Route 3, all along Route 3, are increasingly involved, and people involved with educators I have and people tied to them involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, also in the form of wire crime acts and methods roles, falsified police reports roles, their roles at crime scenes of various natures, and confessions tied to it. Heather Hansen and Joel DeMoro have roles with like damaging a real estate sign and things with all along Route 175 and people and things associated with the corners on that and the conjunctions to it, like Walker Hill Road and Ridge Road, increasingly involved with retired police chiefs and their intimate ties with the same houses near me, involved with a whole bunch of people with identity theft, fraud, slanders from other areas. There have been plenty of evidence in my area, all sides of my houses. I don't even know what campuses they went to, some of them. In other words, never saw some of them on a campus in my life. As ones increasingly, in other words, with their families too, putting fake things in databases. And with the news, they're stealing my identity because there are other people involved too. They don't even know themselves because everyone's attached to fake and change communications with that one. And then they lie about why people are using their own names or other people's names. They even recorded this when they were speaking fake things into the news. Also, WTNH sources have roles with identity theft, fraud, slanders. A bunch of people and tied to people named O'Neill, involved with educators at West Hartford who live in Wethersfield, involved with foreign and domestic intelligence, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and terrorists. Wethersfield police in the fake conversations they pretended with me. I never had. They have roles with collusions with Saudi Arabia attackers, and the difference of sides where neither side realizes. Two, because they have criminally foreign influence, tactical illusions, readings of books, and the value of sequence and reality because of the relative to the campus's uses, even with differences racketeering. There was someone with the name Wayne involved with a Dr. Judd, of a Dean Judd from Trinity College, from Central Connecticut State University, recorded involved with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, his co-defendants and their family members with predicate acts with facts at and next to campuses roles, also with their educators from off campuses, sports, church, persuaded. Also, everyone just changed to roles and just repeating fake things, increasingly tied. In other words, so these are people at and next to each of the campuses I went, have collusions of people planting evidence on my street from other areas, went out of their way to do it. And they have collusions with the World Trade Center attack, people with the FBI, the Witness Protection Program, at corners of streets. Also, a Joshua Stryker is involved with people with multiple criminal enterprises and various natures of federal criminals and their family members at corners of buildings and campuses, planting predicate acts with facts, sequence shifts, and collusions with such bodies and body dumping spots involved. Increasingly with people from other campuses that were involved with the people that recorded putting fake things in databases roles from other classrooms. I don't even know them. It's not like a bullying instance when they try to make fake, they lie about what people say and what they think about what people are saying on social media because they already were shown, they already attached me to fake conversation with themselves and with others. For example, Channel 3 News, Connecticut, after the World Trade Center attack, recorded in their collusions also before the World Trade Center attack and since with Saudis and people countering them as collusions because there's differences, racketeering, worse than war crimes. They also have lawyers of the Saudi victims, of the World Trade Center victims, who are collusions with the names at the World Trade Center and next to it, and with the court next to it, and names on all sides. Also with the roles with these countries at next to the campuses as they actually are. And a bunch of people at UConn have roles with a Violet family and a Eric Jensen, a DeMoro family next to Hartford Hospital with the intelligence there. In other words, a bunch of people, Chris Walters, they're involved with syntax with Manchester increasingly too. People involved with Chris Walter planting evidences with intelligence at Manchester, I don't even know. And then increasingly with the Wethersfield schools, with a Michael Emmett, and more sexual and medical offenders of the kids, including medical families named Lombardo and Leahy and Dingleberry and Dewberry and Yagman, involved with them, also with Mendez police that are involved with identity theft, fraud, slander, with some black KKK, Confederate flag theme, Latino theme, like next to Harvard Hospital, too, with the Violet family members and their roles with UConn, with Harvard Hospital, with fake transcripts, forging doctors' names, all kinds of identity theft, fraud, slanders with their educators, too. I never had to put classes with these people. In other words, they made the other ones, there are exceptions that show that were used criminally for an influence consciously to make fake exceptions, where and how they have collusions with all sides of criminal and civil cases, and names out the judicial branch offices next to it, and the corrections offices, and other natures and conjunctions to that, too, as ones also at the crime scenes and with the databases involved with predicate acts and the news at the same time, so then we'll go back and be able to speak about reality legitimately. That's why and how, for example, it's recorded, but for these part of how and why we have black people's rights of eyes, and this inseparable from the subjects of American history that you, as you have heard them entertain, like slavery. You don't bring up slavery without bringing up the witch trials place next to Webb House, where George Washington had to come to counter-extort with James Madison's plan right before the last battle of the Revolutionary War. Noted, now named the Webb Stevens Museum. So now layers of other sense and sensibilities, narratives, still too, hyper additionally replacing and making it and screening, make it harder, seemingly harder to discern. You know, in other words, they're communicating other for George Washington distinctly from James Madison and the founders behind him and his plan. That's why George Washington came there. And that was when it enabled him to have the leverage to counter-extort, but why they also had to leave entrenched slavery, northern colonies and southern colonies, sickly distinctly. Natures of suburbs designed to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. Be a little bit not big enough. Tactically denatured relationship to the grounds, identity relationship to self-value roles only mean to counter the negative value nature progressions, acts, and nature to self-value needs and means to make positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures only if they're going to self-value criminal and ceaseless natures and means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures also simultaneously used to obfuscate the increasingly being demonstrated to us by nature itself, identity of relativity to ourselves, of the human fact-attribute nature breaching method, for example, that nature shows us. One of the things that all those different crazy laws against everyone in different ways and was about a human fact-attribute nature breaching method. That's simultaneously with the torture, the extortion. And that was the end goal. And that was the motive and the means and the method of that torture, extortion, and fact-attribute nature, and therefore physical slavery that was entrenched non-distinctly southern colonies and northern colonies. And that has also not been addressed also as evidence. And because it was also sickly, distinctly entrenched, specifically to measure and maintain with where and how non-distinctly everyone was the victim of the same thing. No one would address that, but they would speak like they could speak for integrity anyway. They would speak about power anyway. They would speak about might anyway. They would speak about God with passions and emotions. They would speak about passions and emotions, motivations, leaving out and replacing the breaching method. The breaching method is part of your motivations, where and how you deny the revelations, the evidence, the hyper-evidential with black pupils, whites of eyes, even though you don't want to. Where and how you were influenced to. That was recorded, and there were other motivations than you could fathom that come with the ones that you could discern. They have not yet discerned. Increasingly, psychiatry has rules with differences racketeering worse than war crimes, with opinion natures regarding mental health and what other people say, associated with the networks, associated with uses of Danny Trejo's difference. I think he's a good actor. But when they speak about prisons, they're leaving out the organized crimes the prisons have with child offenders and pretending to be against it at the same time, when clear as day, they're criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw predators there, incapable of affording discern what's actually recorded on a mass scale, involved before the World Trade Center attack, with torture methods that countries A through Z have roles with. The United Nations has roles with it, Bob Chase, increasingly with sexual medical offenders with Facebook personally and professionally, and people involved with the FBI director directly and indirectly with the Joshua Julian. Joshua Julian is one of the ones with a Facebook page of a principal upskirt nature who's recorded involved also with sexual and medical offenders of kids. And a lot of them are mental health care with the agencies and the courts personally and professionally involved with their kids and adults as prosecutors, judges, victims advocates, etc. Even not by accident originally and still, they are forced appointed lawyers. They're involved with all kinds of scams and relative delusions. That's why they switch names and forge names with the interbranch too. Collusions with the interbranch too with that. On a mass scale, Americans don't have due process legitimately since founding. They want to make and keep the nature of debate about due process with people only allowed to conceive about the foreign due process. And that only hurts Americans too. Worlds with other countries, forced by nature to be tactically ulterior than A through Z have entertained them. And with their descriptions of why and how we are united and or not. Nature shows us we are a united species body of individual bodies that are simultaneously independent, so we can discern its way with valuing those things distinctly. But that simultaneously increases their value, both of them. But see, that is here too. Value state, birth system, or it is forced from here, not as death, not as torture, extortion, or slavery, but as lethal hadiths. In other words, the prayers of the people in the city the most have been to change this tactically denatured ground below our feet. We don't leave out how our founders, what did we pay attention when they actually communicated the suburbs were designed for torture, extortion, and factory nature slavery, tactically denatured. When they speak about a comment, the experts, they're using every truth for a lie. The names of each of the experts of each of the sciences. You don't leave out how breaching method. No, they're charging us with things we don't even need. In other words, we have this unity. The Americans that are not Native Americans, for example, no Native American should be homeless, and no reservation should still have to debate or not know clearly as day. James Madison, the founders behind him, Native pure too, Native too. Not as ones that didn't have to be counter-extorted. There are proofs that's how there was such a means for leverage, counter leverage to those internationally entrenched monitored conversations, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and terrorists, originally and still as they were grouped. The differences of the guilt of the witch trials, courts, the police forms associated with them, the political at the time, the foreign or domestic political. There's a hyper foreign there too. It needs other things others ourselves blame for things that it caused and keeps. It needs things like criminal foreign influences blamed for things that are hyper criminal foreign influences. There is a name other than. There is a name hyper additional from those we know, A through Z, as countries that could and locations, territories that could only be operated by the voices that, and the fact, nature, quality, aspects, natures, and styles, of locations, areas, and states. we are in a semi-ancient trap that knew this. And it forced, tricked, and hurt, and persuaded names A through Z to only remember names A through Z, blaming other things, others ourselves. And having blamed that, would a breach blame such for what a breaching method caused and keeps the proverbial devil, the proverbial shaitan. In other words, so they have Sandy Hook prison has people with the name Cintron that might be intelligence, and like one of the people pretending to be a prisoner. He has roles with people with a all along Route 3 and its conjunctions, and where Omni Place used to be, and per him, he recorded too. They recorded other than they could afford to have discerned now. They have a Pito Cardona. I never saw him in my life, and I could pretty much prove that I could beat him in a fight just from YouTube. And I fought the guy who took his title from him, Paul Spadafora. So, that guy, the Pito Cardona, has roles with people with Sandy Hook prisons. I don't know their names, and they're doctors too. There's a doctor of the guy who said his name is Cintron. And in other words, there's a prison there, as a campus. No, I believe they refer to them as prison camp, their campuses too. But in Newtown, Connecticut, Sandy Hook, they have the judicial branch offices and the corrections offices of Connecticut involved with them with sexual and medical offenders of kids, and with people next to body dumping spots involved, and their roles with the intelligence families, with leasing agents, and their roles with the military, foreign and domestic, with the leasing agents, and like ones with the who also do the service for the building, and roles with all natures of investigators. Same ones about body dumping spots, and training people to run prisons and other prisons. These ones on off the state corrections offices and judicial branch offices in Wethersfield, Connecticut, that are increasingly involved at New Britain, Connecticut, with a bunch of names that went to different campuses, that were putting fake things in databases at each of the campuses I went to and put names next to it, fake motivations for it too. Increasingly, we keep hearing people pretending that prisons are against child abuse. Oh, because that's their motivation to stop. No one's going to stop things for those like that. In other words, they have women roles with this, women judges, women investigators, women identities with the campuses, with the courts, their family members. Everyone's just forcing everyone to speak through others. Or when they're just changing and faking with this communicate when they're speaking alone, they're just faking transcripts. There are mass interstates, including I don't even know all the names yet of the people involved yet, but there are people that work for directors too, who are involved at Central Connecticut State University and the sides of it. Also with a bunch of people all along Route 3 and its conjunctions, and all sides of a religious spot there, with a bunch of people who have roles of predicate acts of facts on my area and on my street, and roles with some untimely deaths, with the people planting fake ties, fake natures of ties to me, like a Robert Rodriguez, involved with that religious spot right next to it, involved also with the principal upskirt nature, and people with the name Scalora involved with the World Trade Center attack. Also, it was recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. There are intelligence people involved with communications, I don't even know her name, with a hairdresser associated with a Scalora family, and they're putting fake ties, fake natures of ties to me and others, and way worse, with the Scalora family involved with the World Trade Center attack, and with families involved with all sides of criminal and civil cases interstates, and at the World Trade Center, at the court next to the World Trade Center, involved with the court itself, and names on all sides and their sources, also involved with sequence shifts and predicate acts, also just forced to be roles, where they're just faking conversations with people as the investigators associated intercities with Channel 3 News. They have a whole bunch of people tied to it as a Gail King and her family members and their intimate ties, also involved before and after the World Trade Center attack, planting fake ties, fake natures of ties to me, rules, planting evidence so other people can pretend fake their motivations. That might have been the kids that were, I don't know, kids. I don't know how old they were. I mean, they were older than kids. They drove by with a door open. And in other words, uh, there's more than one person with the name Ron involved with intelligence families, men and women at East Hartford locations, also involved with those locations. Intercities, Rocky Hill campuses, Weathersfield campuses through time. And their rules with Elm Streets in Rocky Hill and Weathersfield. And increasingly with proven child abusers, leaders of kids years apart. And ones I don't know the names of at all. And others tied to them who came out into my area seeking me out as strangers who are ties between those people. One of the things that ties them is the World Trade Center attack rolls, as their rolls with names at the World Trade Center and next to it, and next to where they live. And that's a manifest thing. These are also people at the judicial branch offices in different natures of conjunctions to it. Like Weathersfield Pizza has recorded wire crime acts and methods with the Weathersfield police and with the FBI and courts that are refusing to identify themselves legitimately. They're also confessing, demonstrating, recording their pretend other. Stephen Stocko and a whole bunch of people tied to Stephen Stocko and his educators are involved with some sexual and medical offenders of kids and untimely deaths at Central Connecticut State University with people on off the judicial branch offices and corrections offices in Weathersfield. Involved also in my street tie. I never saw him on my street in my life. And I never saw Maria Pizzino on our Weathersfield campus in my life. A whole bunch of people at Hartford Hospital and the judicial branch offices and the corrections offices involved with intimate ties of Maria Pizzino with foreign and domestic countries, planting evidences at all sides and at Central Connecticut State University with their educators through time, and with my neighbor involved with them with predicate acts with databases at campuses, wire crimes with police that attached me fake conversations with them as a kid, and now as an adult. These are agencies that have roles of people with psychiatry that are criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions wrought too, replacing what our founders communicated. So Danny Trejo, please do what's right and get them on paper, one name and sequence. Have them fear to God to bring up black and white and pretend impassioned emotions about difference too, including with the parties. They don't know how to think. Let them follow mandated law. Get me off and make conversations with Channel 3 News about the World Trade Center attack, and let's get forward because there's more. They have roles with foreign bodies involved, overt criminal enterprises, body dumping spots too. In other words, and you guys are not getting onto paper since I was a kid with the people involved with the World Trade Center attack. You guys are stacking predicate acts with facts into databases, including with the same arrests, making confessions too about how they switch names of arresting officers and then just put charges with no writing and fake things in databases. God knows what's there, but they know it's fake. Now CT must break, but there is seed interested. So California has rules too with Connecticut and with Rhode Island and with Washington, D.C. and New York names who have predicate acts at campuses and next to them, collusions, name switching and forging, and a bunch of judges and their family members next to the campuses too, with the same house near me, involved with wire crime acts and methods. And these police that fake conversations would be at the police station as a kid, and I was an adult. At Hartford Hospital too, a bunch of people from Hartford Hospital have roles with some untimely deaths years apart on my street too, with confessions about it by the Robert Rodriguez. I did not respond to it. 2 times he was trying to pretend I didn't respond at all. I saw him planting evidences. Black people, since every year since before the World Trade Center attack, intercities, they have people involved with this that have been planting evidences intercities, specifically to pretend they don't understand people. You're going to watch how many natures of crime methods the people that have been speaking about crimes are involved with. And we're going to watch with the child abuses acts and methods. A bunch of people with Hartford Hospital have roles intercities involved with other medical campuses and childhood campuses too, including with more sexual and medical offenders at Sandy Hook campuses with judicial branch offices and the state and the state capitol, and spots and intelligence next to them. A whole bunch of military tied to a Mark Violet with the military with Elm Streets and Weathersfield and Rocky Hill and his educators and his brother and people with Hartford Hospital, his mother, involved with a whole bunch of people. I don't know their names. They know my name. With their business with at and next to the state capitol in Hartford, Connecticut. Involved also with FBI Director Robert Luskin. People involved with Russians, Ukraine, Korea, Mark Violet. The demonstrated recorded confirmed people from Korea. Also involved with the DeMoro family. I never saw them together with identity theft, fraud, slanders. They have all these different countries in the news now too, who have time collusions with Hartford Hospital and their patients too, forcing them to collusions with them, even if those are undercover too. You guys have delusions. Don't forget about the black people's rights of life. And I'm going to delineate your delusions from your criminally foreign influence back, true nature, quality aspects of nature. Get the interbranch on paper with their sources and the medical tied to them. Increasingly, Maria Vizino has narratives about Alcoholics Anonymous that she brought up to me as her roles with names on off two-route highway and conjunctions to it, increasingly also involved with body dumping spots at the same time with those other natures of organized crimes. Brian Bonin said he has roles all along Route 3 with people with the state judicial branch offices and his neighbors with criminal enterprises and people that make drugs with the Hartford Hospital and people with criminal enterprises with his neighbors and him. He sought me out to confess, demonstrate, record, confirm that's his roles with Route 3 and the Zano family, also planting evidence, fake ties, fake nature type secret ships. In other words, I never saw him inside of a campus in my life. He's also involved with people with Cub Scout leaders, involved with various natures of organized crime, people with the state police, all along Route 3 and the Brown Turnpike and its conjunction, like two-route highway where it runs into Hangdog Lane, and all kinds of federal evidences, crimes, and people with the name, these names involved, and the interbranch refusing to identify themselves, and collusions with the news, refusing to follow mandated law, and stealing people's identities, as collusions with all natures of crime scenes, black pupils. In other words, so fear God. If you start, listening about psychiatry and thinking there's integrity when you have celebrities speaking, because too they're faking their motivations for when they speak. In other words, it's recorded. Just follow mandated law. Get me off the fake conversations about the World Trade Center attack, and then watch what else is involved with it. Because I was in the Ninth Circuit Court as an observer, right next to the World Trade Center towers, right before the attack, and the night before it, and too. And I know that people long term before it and short term interstates, they had collusions with that with a whole bunch of different countries and Saudi Arabia. But all sides were used remotely. It's also weird how they have the people actually as they are manifest, speaking about Catherine the Great and Russia, India. In other words, you don't know that, huh? In other words, the suburbs are manifest here and there, looking almost exactly alike. America to Russia to Ukraine, they were built for torture, extortion, slavery. It's not even debatable, let alone debating the cities, black pupils. Get them on paper, one name and sequence. Please, Danny Trejo, get them on paper. I'll show you what they do. They're playing games with difference, with theater identities, fake and pretending other, and where and how you guys are obligated by mandated law to stop playing games with Sandy Hook predators. There are proofs that they were putting fake things in databases, fake transcripts tied to this Latin Lanza, and that there are psychiatry families further than the ones I know about involved with child abusers in Newtown, Connecticut, as ones involved with Sandy Hook, with Rocky Hill campuses, Weathersfield campuses, further Hartford campuses, and there are connections between these people. Joe DeMaul said there are more child campuses off of Route 3 with child campuses in Cromwell. Increasingly, a John DeMaul and a Joe DeMaul with Cromwell and a Colol family and their educators, people with the name of Neville. Increasingly, Mr. Neville has roles with the interbranch and foreign with Cromwell, planting evidences, intercities, and people with a Park Street in Hartford with a Daryl Sullivan involved with the FBI and the courts, with foreign countries and overt criminal enterprises and sexual and medical offenders of kids. You get them on paper now. These are people next to the campuses too. Collusions with identity theft, fraud, slanders. Also with the news at the same time. Don't forget. Please, Danny Trejo, do what's right for the World Trade Center. Those cowards. Who's in there over there preventing me changing what I say?